Welcome back. Okay, one last thing. I just have to share this with you before I pick up your phone calls. I know there's a lot of people on hold waiting, but in fact, all the lines I think are full. But this from Victoria Jones is, she sends out a newsletter every day from Talk Media News. And Governor Rick Scott, Republican of Florida. Remember Rick Scott? Remember Charlene Dill? Charlene Dill was this young woman in her late 20s, early 30s, as I recall, who had 2 or 3 children, single mother, and she had a heart condition for which she needed to take a medication to regularize her heartbeat. It was a hereditary condition. It's not all that uncommon. And if it's treated with medication, it's no problem. And if it's not treated with medication, your heart goes into arrhythmia and you die. And Charlene Dill was working 3 jobs to support her 2 or 3 children. And at 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs, she still was not making enough money to afford her medication. Now, not making enough money to afford your medication means in most states that you qualify for Medicaid. But Rick Scott, being a criminal billionaire, head of, the guy who ran the company that was convicted of the largest Medicare fraud in history. I don't know if he's a billionaire or just a multimillionaire. But, he's a rich sleazebag, which is not to say all rich people are sleazebags, but Rick Scott is one. And he said, no, we're not going to expand Medicaid, in Florida. So only the people who aren't working at all, the really poor people, disabled people, or people who just plain old flat out can't find anything, or people who are working and earning enough to qualify for Obamacare, only they can have health insurance. People like Charlene Dill can't. And so Charlene Dill was cutting her pills in half, hoping that it would keep her alive, while Rick Scott was going to his dinner parties and sipping his, fancy wines and whatnot, and she died. And it's not just her. I mean, she's one of the ones that we know about, but according to Harvard University, it's tens of thousands of people across the United States who've died in red states because these red state governors who have blood on their hands, like sleazebag Rick Scott, will not provide Medicaid to people. So here's the irony. This from The Hill and from Victoria. Well, I'm reading from Victoria Jones's newsletter. Florida Governor Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, warned in a letter to the White House Wednesday that his state is in dire need of more staff and mosquito-killing tools to effectively prevent an outbreak of the Zika virus. Now, let me remind you, the president has asked for $1.9 billion to fight Zika. Part of it would be to stop mosquitoes. Part of it would be to develop a vaccine. If such a bill was put before the House of Representatives, it would pass in a heartbeat because every Democrat would vote for it and at least 30 Republicans would. It would pass. But Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, is still holding on to the Hastert rule, which says that the only time, if you're a Republican and you're on the House of Representatives, the only time you bring legislation to the floor is if you can pass it with all Republicans. So Republicans get the credit for it. And the majority of Republicans, well, I don't know if it's the majority, but the Tea Party, certainly group of Republicans, will not say yes to anything that has to do with America's first black president. You kidding? And so, ironically, the Tea Party, and Rick Scott, likes to call himself a Tea Partier, and these conservatives in the House of Representatives are preventing the money from being available. So Rick Scott is writing a letter to the president asking for money that his own damn party is preventing from being available. He says, quote, "Florida needs action from the federal government now." Scott said that he had personally requested more assistance, such as mosquito surveillance and abatement equipment, during his meeting in D.C. last month with HHS Secretary Sylvia Matthews Burwell, but hasn't received it yet. Gee, I wonder why. Separately, Victoria notes, states can use Medicaid dollars to pay for Zika fighting tools such as mosquito repellent, 90% of family planning services, which would prevent women from getting pregnant if they get the Zika virus so they don't have babies with microcephaly who are going to have very short lives or live their entire lives totally disabled. I mean, functionally with no brain. So separately, states can use Medicaid dollars to pay for Zika fighting tools such as mosquito repellent, 90% of family planning services, including condoms, oral contraceptives, and emergency contraceptives. Those services are critical, the federal memo says, because of Zika's potential impact on pregnant women and their fetuses. Only problem? Rick Scott has said no, he doesn't want the Medicaid money. Rick Scott is a rich guy. He says to people like Charlene Dill and other working poor in Florida, screw you guys. This is Rick Scott's mantra. I'm a Republican. I don't give a rat's ass about poor people. The working poor, spit on them. The White House also said states are required to cover all medically necessary diagnostic services related to the detection of the Zika virus. Well, how are you going to do that, Rick Scott, down in Florida when you've said no to people having access to Medicaid? This not only demonstrates the hypocrisy of the Republican Party, it demonstrates the moral criminality of the Republican Party and scumbags like Rick Scott.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.